Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro is unloading on former Fox News host Tucker Carlson over his recent comments on Israel and Hamas. During a sit-down conversation, Carlson and retired Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor suggested United States support for Israel in its war against Hamas could lead to a war with Iran, and Carlson appeared to mock the idea that the United States would score moral victories in the conflict, while Macgregor accused Israel of committing war crimes, Mediaite reports.
Here's Shapiro's reaction to that conversation.
There are some people on the right who I think are being fully disingenuous and who are looking for an excuse to jump right on the same moral equivalency bandwagon as the left. I think there are certainly people like that. We've talked about them on the show before. I'm sure we'll talk about them on the show again. But one of the moves that's being made in order to stifle Israel's response to this is to claim that if Israel does respond, as it has to respond in order to root out Hamas entirely, that this will end in World War III. So yesterday, Tucker had on his program a general named Douglas Macgregor. Macgregor has in the past suggested that Jewish money is behind American support for Israel and all the rest. But Macgregor has military expertise, and he is essentially now warning that Armageddon is coming, and his proposed solution would be that Israel does nothing, which, by the way, absolutely promotes the idea of Armageddon, because if Israel does nothing after 1,500 of its citizens are slaughtered and Hamas remains in place, the chances of a broad-scale multi-front attack on Israel that will require American intervention.
He later called Tucker's take bizarre and ugly and said it is not a conservative position. So this isn't the first time these two have clashed. They have different views on what constitutes a conservative ideology, particularly with respect to foreign policy. Ben Shapiro, now I don't agree with him. He says that people like Tucker are doing the kind of moral equivalency that the left is doing, and in my commentary here, in my clashes with you, I have tried to make clear that I do not think there is a moral equivalency at work here between Hamas and what Israel is doing, and I have vociferously criticized wrongdoing that I've seen the Israeli government committing while saying nothing compares to the terrorist attacks. But all of that is different from saying that we have some obligation to aid the Israeli government and to never criticize it. I mean, it's not conservative to in my view, maybe Ben Shapiro thinks it is, to unthinkingly support anything like what our own government does. So why would we unthinkingly fund and support what a foreign government is doing? And I think that the Tucker conservatives are questioning whether uncompromising, unconditional support for a foreign government, be it Israel, be it Ukraine, be it someone else, serves U.S. national security issues.
So on the national security front, I think that Ben Shapiro seems uninformed. He doesn't really even choose to make an argument there. He just says, oh, it's crazy to think this is going to lead to World War III. There are literally drone attacks happening on U.S. bases in the region that the U.S. has already indicated if its soldiers die, it will be pulled into the conflict. So it's already talking about, it's shipped aircraft carriers to the region and is talking about supporting Israel in a ground invasion. So the idea that this is likely leading to an escalation, that it could involve an entanglement, the likes of which we just got out of in Afghanistan, is not fantasy. It is a very real probability that many people who are much more expert than Ben Shapiro are warning up. This question of moral equivalency is confusing to me. I'm a little confused. What does that mean? Are we saying that we cannot morally weight the fact that more children have died in Gaza, have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza, than the total number of people that have been killed in the horrific events of October 7th? Is it moral equivalency to say that I value those lives equally, and that given there is an ongoing tragedy that is now eclipsing in pure number of bodies in Gaza, the number of people who were murdered in Israel, that announcing that, of course, I think all people are equal and all human lives are equal. So of course I want to draw moral equivalencies between the tragedy of innocent civilians being killed in Israel and the tragedy of innocent civilians being killed in Gaza. And to say we have the power to stop the latter, we absolutely should use our influence as a country to do so. That seems to me to be what Ben Shapiro is objecting to. And given some of his former statements on Arabs, I think some people are going to be asking the question whether or not what he's really objecting to is not some kind of moral equivalency that downplays the gravity of what happened to those Israeli civilians, but one in which he wants to downplay the gravity of what's happening to Palestinians, who he has described like this in the past. He said, Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult issue. He said that in defense of settlements, saying #settlements rock. Those are illegal settlements, by the way, that are condemned by the international community. So what are we talking about here when he's articulating that there's some kind of moral equivalency that we should condemn?
I mean, he's condemning the support among leftist activists on college students and with several groups.
No, he was talking about...
Let me finish their support for what Hamas did in the terrorist
He was
attack.
specifically talking about Tucker Carlson, Robbie. This is a clip about Tucker Carlson.
When you said he was accusing Tucker Carlson of co-signing what leftist activists are saying about the conflict.
Is Tucker Carlson doing that?
No, I don't think it's true. But
leftist
activists are, in fact, doing that.
I know you want to have a conversation about Tucker Carlson, but this is a conversation about Ben Shapiro. I'm sorry, about leftist activists. This is a conversation about Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson.
All right, you asked me what was being alleged.
Yes,
I think that's an unfair smear for Tucker Carlson.
Irrelevant.
But it's not an unfair smear against activist groups who are endorsing over and over again what Hamas has done.
Activist groups and the majority of people, the hundreds of thousands of people across the world and the country who are out in support of Palestinian rights over the weekend, and since this crisis became on the public scene again, the crisis is ongoing. Obviously, the occupation of Gaza is ongoing and has been going on for 75 years. But the most recent protests are a lot of people who are wanting to free Palestine. And the idea that you would cherry pick specific instances to devalue an entire argument of people, including many folks who don't even want to, frankly, end the occupation, but do want a ceasefire to end the hundreds and hundreds of people that are being killed on a daily and weekly basis, is, I think, really inappropriate. And to not want to engage,
I'm
wait a minute.
literally just publicizing their own words, the words of organizations like DSA and Black Lives Matter.
And I want to publicize the words of Ben Shapiro, who...
And I'm not cutting you off from doing that. We're talking about it. I don't agree with what Ben Shapiro has to say. I think in his disagreement with Tucker Carlson here, I am much more in the Tucker Carlson camp.
Well, I'm trying to engage in the statements that he's made about Arabs that show that are some evidence that he fundamentally does not value their lives equally as Israeli lives. When you say that Israelis like to build and Arabs like to live in sewage and bomb things, that's a pretty clear indication to me that you don't really value Arab life.
Right, it's bad. And what I am most concerned about his perspective is that is it an excuse for a greater conflict, greater involvement on the U.S. part. And frankly, there's a little bit of like a rhetorical sleight of hand going on here by saying, well, it's not going to cause World War III. I don't know if greater U.S. involvement in this conflict would spill into like a confrontation with China and Russia and the world powers that would maybe kick this conflict up to where you could credibly call it World War III. But it would still be like we don't want a repeat of the Iraq War and what happened in Libya and what's happened in the U.S. involvements, which did not constitute World War III, but were horrible for the region, were not good for the U.S., that the American people of all political parties widely agree upon now were mistakes. So even if it's not World War III that's going to break out, it's still not some conflict we want to be a part of.
Yeah, and my concern is not only that, it's that Ben Shapiro and a number of others, including people in our own government, have used language that denigrates the value of Palestinian lives and seems to be setting up for an ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing that humanitarian organizations have been calling attention to, especially in the wake of this crisis. So it's very curious to see someone like Benjamin Shapiro, who has said in the past, he has been very protective of people's rights, if you want to talk about college campuses, to say what they want. He's been very critical of students who have tried to cancel folks on college campuses. But just recently, last week, he tweeted out, if you work in the media, this is a specific media criticism, if you work in the media and uncritically and reflexively parrot the genocidal, Jew-hating, terrorist liars Hamas, you should be fired. Now, earlier we did a segment on how our own government is trying to suppress reporting from Al Jazeera because it's arguing that it is repeating Hamas talking points. We saw this with Russiagate. If Russia puts out a tweet that says Black Americans are treated poorly in America, and Black America agrees. That was considered in the middle of the 2020 election to be agreeing with a Russian talking point. Everything that's inconvenient to Hillary Clinton was agreeing with a Russian talking point. And I see a very similar pattern happening here, where everything that is critical of Israel is described as a Hamas talking point. And this is a radical departure for Ben Shapiro, who previously said virtually no one should be canceled for speaking about politics in unapproved ways, to now be lockstep with our federal government and trying to suppress foreign news outlets.
Yeah, well, we have no disagreement there. I think it's an obvious hypocrisy for people on the right to take the position that on this issue, this is a bridge too far, this is hate speech. We're going to talk more about this in a subsequent segment about specifically what Ron DeSantis is doing on this topic. But I think it's obviously hypocritical. Now, also, a lot of the people criticizing, not you, but a lot of the people I see criticizing in like kind of the liberal sector, criticizing Ben Shapiro and others for this kind of thing, have no history of being against cancel culture or being in support of free speech anyway,
like
so
who?
I'm not sure what they think.
Like who? Because the left has been very consistent on this.
Yeah, I'm not tagging you or the left, but again, the armies of people who think that misinformation should be broadly censored, that...
Well, those people, the misinformation crew is generally establishment libs who are, like Ben Shapiro, very much in favor of the Zionist project.
Yeah, and I disagree with that, too.
Yeah, so I don't know.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Okay, all right. Well, stick around. We'll have a rising for you right after this.